Hey everybody! Yesterday was the last day of Tour de Fleece, which is a spinning marathon kind of thing that coincides with Tour de France. So hand spinners like to spend the same time period as Tour de France spinning and trying to achieve various goals, maybe competing with other spinners to see who spins the most or something like that. So I did Tour de Fleece this year, and it's just a very informal thing usually, and that was the case for me. So my goal was to kind of get rid of some of the batts that had been languishing in my stash for a while. I make a lot of batts and I sell them on my website to hand spinners, and there just been some over the months that they were still lingering around, you know. For some of them I had made many multiples, and so I just had one or two left. And for some of them, I think they're kind of ugly. Honestly, the ugly ones I didn't even put on my website. I just was like, well, maybe I'll spin this myself and I'll over dye the yarn or something. I don't know. So there were some ugly ones, and then there were just one or two that didn't sell, and I wanted to spin them myself. So my goal was to spin 19 batts. They're all 3-ounce batts. And in the end, I spun 17 batts. So I didn't quite meet my goal, but honestly, that goal was really a stretch for me, so I'm really proud of myself still. And I just want to go through some of them real quick, and then I'm going to share with you how I am going to wash these, set them, and then label them and put them in my yarn stash. So these blue and grays were a gray Romney that I blended with some blue yarn scraps, and I spun them as a single and then plied with a blue cotton thread. These turned out really nice. Romney's a long wool, so it's not super soft, but it's really smooth and it feels nice. I was happy with how that turned out. I had some other Romney from the same fleeces, but I had dyed them. So this is some purple with scraps, and it's just a single. I did most of these as bulky singles so I could just like power through them and get them out of my stash. Let's see, this one was also the same Romney, but I blended it half and half with a black llama, and this is really nice. I love llama and Romney. They go really well together. And more of that same Romney. These were big fleeces. Okay, I had two of these orange ones, orange and yellow, which are also blended with a caramel colored alpaca and a little bit of llama, I think. And there's some little bits of silk in them too. This is really similar to the blue and gray. It's just yellow and gray and green. I thought these were really ugly. Maybe it's just not my taste. But they're not so bad as yarn. I might see if I can find yarns to pair them with in a weaving, or I might over dye these. And I also had one of these green Romney with the caramel alpaca and some really similar colored llama, and this one's nice too. None of those Romney ones are very soft though. That's just the nature of Romney. I also had two of these super squishy Rambouillet Columbia Cross fleece that I blended into batts, and I blended them with yarn scraps and silk noil. So these are really fun. They're very squishy and nice. This one's a 2-ply and this one's a single ply. They're both really nice. I had one more batt that I wanted to spin, but I didn't get to it. But this is the same blend. It's just a pink, rosy, dusty pink color. But I'll get to it. Okay, I also have one of my black velvet batts. I just wanted to spin one so I would have a sample. I still sell these. These are fairly popular. It is a really soft, fine Corriedale, like the softest Corriedale you can imagine. Corriedale is usually pretty soft, but not the softest. This is really soft for Corriedale. And it's black, it's very dark, and I blended it with some naturally dyed silk noil and Angora for my rabbits. So it kind of gives it this frosty, tweedy sort of look. I did another Angora batt. This was kind of like a scrappy batt. It was a bunch of Cormo wool that was kind of neppy and not super desirable, but I don't like to waste things, so I blended it with a whole bunch of Angora, and it made this very soft, delicate pinky gray yarn, and I plied it with some pink thread. I think it looks really cute. This, I spun most of this technically before Tour de Fleece, but I chain plied it during Tour de Fleece, so the plying yardage still counts. And this is just a braid that someone had given me. I got these two batts. I think this was actually one batt. This is one of my scrappy batts. It was really nice. I just had one left and I basically just stole it for myself. But I can use it as a sample. So this was a pink and gray blend with a lot of scraps, like pink scraps and teal scraps and things like that. And I plied it with one pink thread and one white thread. And I think it's pretty, but I kind of wish I had done something different with the plying, but I'm not super unhappy with it. I think it's still nice. I have one of these. This was some of that super soft Corriedale blended with, I think it was Gulf Coast Native, into a single, and it's this really dark forest green color. And the last batt is this. This turned out really cool. This is a purple and yellow-green batt, and it has merino and rambouillet and silk and flax. And I plied it with some purple thread. So I think this turned out really pretty. So that's all the yarn. One more that I didn't spin yet is this marshmallow fluff, which I sell in my shop. I want another color sample. I only have a white sample. And I'm going to experiment with knitting or weaving. So I do need to get this spun up as soon as possible. And marshmallow fluff is my blend that I make all the time in various colors. And it is half Cormo wool and half Angora from my own Angora rabbits. And I make different naturally dyed colors. It's super soft. And it's super squishy. It's like ridiculously luxurious. So that's all my yarn I spun during Tour de Fleece. I'm going to go over to my kitchen sink and I'm going to show you how I will wash all of these. So to wash my yarn, usually what I do with singles is I use really hot water and some dish soap. And I'm also going to try to group the yarns together so that they don't like contaminate each other. If there's any like shedding, like with Angora fiber, sometimes some of the Angora's hairs will kind of shed a little bit, or with dye bleeding, especially with indigo, it usually bleeds a little bit with its first wash. So I'm going to group yarns together so that they don't contaminate each other. These purple yarns and this dark blue yarn are both dyed with indigo, so I'm okay with putting them together. Same with this green yarn. This one should be fine. It does have a little bit of Angora in it, but I don't think it will hurt those yarns that are already in there. Wow, this is a lot of yarn. Okay, that's good for now. Now with singles, they are a more delicate yarn, and so anytime you can add a little bit of strength to a single ply yarn is good. When I wash singles, I try to like felt them just slightly. I don't want to turn them into like dreadlocks or anything, but I just try and kind of rub them and rough them up just a little bit so that they kind of felt a little bit and make the yarn that much more stable. You can see there's quite a murky blue tinge to this water. That's the indigo. With indigo dye, the dye particles, they sort of get worked into the fiber with each step of the process. So I dyed this fiber as loose fiber, scoured fiber, and then I washed it and rinsed it. And in that process, a lot of the dye adhered to the fiber. Then I blended it and spun it. And while spinning, the particles kind of get pressed into the fiber with your fingers, and your fingers will turn blue often. And that's okay. That's just a normal part of the indigo dye process. And now I'm washing the yarn, and some of those loose particles that haven't adhered are coming off. And with each step of the process, a little bit more gets taken out. And so if I knit this or weave this, that little bit of hand contact will continue to press in more particles if there are any. And if I wash and block whatever I make with it, that will also rinse out some of the loose particles. And eventually there won't be, the water will be clear. So if you are using something dyed with indigo, be cautious during the first few washes, but it should stop eventually. And normally you would never wash something in super hot water that is dyed. But in this case, I'm trying to felt these fibers. Okay, now I'm going to drain the water, and I'm going to move over to the other basin and dip these in cold water, which will also help felt them. Okay, I rinsed them off, but now I'm going to soak them just to get any residual soap rinsed out of them. I'm also curious to see how blue the rinse water is. Okay, now I'm going to do another batch. The water's looking a lot clearer now. I just want to clarify that this is my method for washing and setting single ply yarn. If I'm doing something that doesn't need that extra little bit of felting, then I'm not going to use hot water. I may or may not even use soap. I usually just soak the yarn in just lukewarm, cool water, and then I squeeze it out and I hang it up. I might use soap if the yarn is a little bit dirty or something like that, but I don't rough it up. I don't use hot water. That's just for doing singles that need a little tiny bit of felting to help them get a little stronger. One thing you do have to be careful of with this method, or anytime you are putting wool yarn into some really hot water and maybe agitating it a little bit, like if you're dyeing it or something like that, is that if the yarn starts to felt, it will begin to felt together, as in the strands in the skein will start to stick to each other. So you have to watch it carefully and not go overboard with your felting, because obviously if your strands of yarn stick together, then your yarn is useless. So watch out for that as you're going along. You just want to felt it up to a certain point where it gets a little bit of strength but doesn't really start felting together. Out of all these skeins that I did, I had one that was just barely starting to stick together, but it was still usable. This Angora yarn's a lot more delicate than the other yarns, so I am not roughing it up quite as much as I did the others. I don't want to ruin it. Alright, here's all my yarn. It's wet, and I'm going to show you how I spin it out in my regular washing machine to get some of the excess water out. Okay, I'm going to carefully layer my skeins into my washer. I am not going to wash them or agitate them. I'm just going to spin them. This will help reduce the drying time by quite a bit. These already feel a lot drier and lighter. Ta-da! Okay, so have you seen that meme that it just says something like nothing can, like the minute you hoist a basket of laundry onto one hip, you're transported back into the 1800s or something like that. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? There's just like these little moments of home tasks that can, if you're kind of a romantic person like me, or you've read too many books or something, that they just kind of transport you into this sort of imaginary world, romanticized version of history that you have. And hanging up skeins of yarn is kind of like that, but it's like I don't know. This was such a beautiful summer day. It was really windy, and actually a storm blew in a couple hours later, so I had to bring all my yarn inside. But it was hot, but it was breezy, and the summer sounds were so loud, and it felt like I was transported into a Miyazaki movie. And I just love the way Miyazaki's movies have just these beautiful, beautiful scenes of basic daily life. I guess hand spinning yarn isn't that basic, but you know what I mean, where he has scenes of people just cooking or eating or hanging the laundry. I just love that. And I also saw somewhere online someone said that all of the good stuff in life is like the white noise. It's everywhere. And the bad stuff are just little tiny disruptions that overpower the white noise for a moment. And now every time I hear the wind or the cicadas and it's like white noise of summer, I think of how good life is. And so I just wanted to share all those thoughts with you guys. And what do you think? Do you imagine you're in a Miyazaki movie sometimes, or am I the only one? Hey everybody, now all my yarn has been washed and dried and it's all set. It's the way it's going to be, but I want to rewind it before I count how many yards there are, because sometimes when you wash and set yarn it changes the yardage slightly because the yarn might like shrink up a little bit or might extend a little bit. So I'm going to wind 17 skeins. No, there's more than 17 skeins because some of those batts are more than one skein. So I'm going to wind a whole lot of yarn. Here's my Angora and Cormo. I'm really happy with how this turned out. It looks very sturdy, at least given the type of yarn that it is. It's still a delicate yarn, but I'm not worried about it falling apart at the drop of a hat. So this is my niddy noddy. It's I guess it's called a 1 yard niddy noddy or a 2 yard, I don't know. But it'll help me measure my yarn. So I just tie it on one end and then I start winding. I think this will look really cute either knitted or woven as like a chunky fluffy hat or a cowl or something like that. Okay, now I can count how many yards I have, because each side is 1 yard. So I just need to count how many strands are on one side and then double it. So there's 63. Whoop. So that means there's 126 yards. So I'm going to write that on this sticky note and stick it on this yarn. Just tie them real quick. So this yarn's breaking a lot. I might have underestimated how strong it would be as a single. Apparently not very strong. So I'm just tying it in knots as it breaks, and it'll still be useful. I'll find a use for it. I should have either twisted this more or felted it more when washing it. That would have made it stronger. Winding all this yarn took forever. So I'm not going to share all the footage of this, and what I am going to show is really sped up. But while we pass the time here, I'm going to share a poem with you by William Wordsworth. If you're a hand spinner, you might have already heard this, but I'm going to share it with you guys. I love William Wordsworth. This poem is called Song for the Spinning Wheel. Swiftly turn the murmuring wheel, night has brought the welcome hour, when the weary fingers feel help as if from fairy power. Dewy night o'ershades the ground, turn the swift wheel round and round. Now beneath the starry sky couch the widely scattered sheep. Ply the pleasant labor, ply, for the spindle, while they sleep, runs with speed more smooth and fine, gathering up a trustier line. Short-lived likings may be bred by a glance from fickle eyes, but true love is like the thread which the kindly wool supplies, when the flocks are all at rest, sleeping on the mountain's breast. Hey everybody! So it took me a long time to measure all those skeins and rewind them. It took me a few hours, but it's the next day and they're all labeled with their yardage amount, and I added them up, and so the total number of yards of yarn that I created during Tour de Fleece is 1,873 yards. And if you also add all of the plying as part of the yardage that I spun, that is the total yards that passed through my fingers on my spinning wheel. That's 2,738 yards. So I'm pretty happy about that. And my next task is to label all of my new yarn skeins. So right now I've just got these little sticky notes with the number of yards, but I'd like to record on my yarn labels a lot of other information so that when I make a project with them later, I have that information that I might need. And these are my yarn labels that I designed for a free download that you can get if you visit my website and sign up for my email list. So go check that out and get your free labels. They have a lot of blank space for recording all the details of your yarn, like the weight, yardage, wraps per inch, twist angle, and more, and also the fiber content. So go get yourself some free labels. And I'm going to label all these, and I'll show you how I determine what the wraps per inch or the weight, like worsted or lace or bulky or whatever. I'll show you how I do all of that. So this one has 30 yards. And I'm not going to record all of this because I don't care about all of it, but I'm going to record the ones that I want. Fiber content is Romney, Llama, scraps. And now I need to try and determine the wraps per inch and the weight. So find an end. Don't mess up your skein too much. So I've got this nice little wraps per inch gauge. This is just a good way to test it really quickly. I'm trying to find like the most common width. Like this is really thick, but down here it's more like typical. So it kind of fits in this number 6, but it's even a little bigger than that. So that's the wraps per inch. But I can also test it with a ruler. You just literally wrap it around, not super tight, just like normal knitting or weaving tension, so the yarn isn't stretched out. Okay, so I wrapped it. It's not super tight, but I am going to kind of squeeze them so that they're really right next to each other. And I want to check how many strands fit in 1 inch. So that starts here and it ends there. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which is the same as my little wooden thing here. So that's pretty cool. So it's 6 wraps per inch. And I can write down the date. I'm just going to write Tour de Fleece 2024. And then to find out what the weight is, like worsted, bulky, whatever, I just look up a chart. There's a ton of them on the internet, so I just Google WPI yarn chart or something like that. And this one says that a 6 would be either super bulky or bulky, which is kind of what I thought, just looking at it. So I'm just going to write down bulky. And then, oops, that's the wrong one. Then I need to put my skein, my poor skein, back together. Okay, and it's ready for its label. And there we go. So I'm going to go through all of that with each skein, and I will show you some of the up close moments, like with this thing and with the ruler. So this one was 54 yards. Oops, wrong section. Wraps per inch. Let's see. I think it's still going to be bulky. So I'm wrapping it a little bit more than 1 inch so that it has a more accurate take in the middle. Just like with blocking a swatch, you do it a little bigger than the amount of stitches you need to count, just so the edges aren't distorted and your count is more accurate that way. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Where is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 6 to 7, which is about the same as the other skein. That's always good. So I've written down wraps per inch, 6 to 7, and I'm writing bulky, Tour de Fleece 2024. And now this one's ready. So as I was measuring and labeling all these new yarns and looking through my stash and kind of putting things together a little bit, I started to get really excited about the potential for different projects, and especially because these bulky singles work so well in weaving, I started thinking about my tri-loom and making some of those giant triangle shawls like this one that I made a couple of years ago. I love this shawl, and I think some of these yarns would look so good paired together in this plaid pattern as these triangle shawls. And so I started discussing in front of the camera about some of my ideas for that. There's these yarns, which I thought were like super ugly, but if I pair them with this kind of deep olive kind of brown, it looks great, and I think woven in a plaid, that would be very, very pretty looking. Then I've got lots of blues, a lot of light blues, and then one dark blue. And I could maybe pair it with this blue, but I'm not sure. I'd have to see how that goes. But that could be a really pretty blue one. And then pairing things with yarns that I already had, I've got these pinky gray skeins that could look really cool with this as a plaid. So I'm thinking all about all these plaid combinations, and I am super excited about it. So of course I will share all of that as I go. It'd be really nice if I could make a bunch of those before the Celtic Festival in October in my area, because I think they might sell well there. If anyone wants to pre-order one, let me know. I will warn you, if you want the full, really large sized triangle shawl, like this, it's going to be in like the $600 range, just so you're aware. That's just because all the materials are pricey and it takes a lot of hours to make. Obviously it's all done by hand. But I'm hoping I can have a few of those larger shawls, but also a few skinnier, like rectangular scarves that won't be quite as expensive. And I can always make zipper bags and tote bags and things like that, so we'll see how it goes. We'll see how much I can actually make. But all in all, this was the first time I really participated in Tour de Fleece, because in previous years I've always been traveling during it, and it was really fun. I haven't spun this much in a very long time. I don't know if I've ever spun this much in that short of a time frame. So it was really cool to see like how much I actually could do. It was really cool to see just how quickly you can spin a batt if it's a bulky single. I've been spinning thinner yarns and 2-ply yarns for so long, I kind of forgot how satisfying it is to do something really quick. And some of these chunky, bulky singles are really cute, so I'm excited to use them in my weavings. If you did Tour de Fleece, I'd love to hear about your experience. Did you spin a lot? Did you kind of fall off the bandwagon? How did it go for you? And also don't forget to sign up for my email newsletter to get your free yarn labels. And I hope you are having a great weekend. Bye!